Hi, I'm Dwayne Biggs, a character designer, illustrator, and comic book artist. During my podcast, I'll be designing a new character during each episode, where I will discuss my love of character design, my journey as an artist, what excites me as a creator, and a look at my artistic process. And now, Dwayne's Design Podcast.
Okay, so for my first podcast, what I'm going to be drawing is a character that I created for a concept for a anime pitch that I'm working on. And the pitch is called Kick Out. And it basically takes the idea of what if some of the elite professional wrestlers suddenly found themselves unemployed. And they took their personas from the ring into the real world. And so what we're going to be designing this time is the lead character called Smash Mouth Stan Morton. And he's kind of like Goldberg meets Stone Cold meets The Rock. And due to his complete inability to ever listen to anyone in authority, he's had the hardest time going from the ring to the real world because he cannot take direction. So that's what the series would be about, is him going from job to job, previous wrestling friends helping him get work, and failing at every opportunity he gets.
Alright, so here we're going to start with just some basic shapes. I really don't know what I want Stan to look like yet. I do know I'm wanting to give him sort of the Goldberg, Stone Cold, tough bad guy with the bald head look. But beyond that, I'm not really sure. So right now I'm just sort of going with the first thing that comes into my mind. I'm not really thinking of, I want to look like this show or this show. I'm just, whatever comes, comes. This is usually how I like to start, just to sort of, see what comes to mind, see if it sparks an idea. So here I'm just, testing some shapes. And I kind of like this, but it's usually not a good idea to always go with your first idea, because a lot of times we have just sort of this natural, this is how I'm going to always draw on that, this is how I'm always going to draw on those. So it's good, especially in the very early blue sky phase where you've not defined your style yet, to really just sort of play and experiment and see what you can come up with. So on this one, I'm going a little bit more shape driven. So it's a little more squished. And while I liked it, I kind of felt like it was a little too squished and too boxy. But I did like the idea of the chin being a little bit more square. Now you'll notice here that I'm flipping the character, and I'm sure you've seen other artists do it. For those who haven't seen an artist do it before, it's a good way to sort of make sure your character isn't leaning or tilting, or sometimes you see a character whose eye is sort of floating away, like one eye is higher than the other. This is a good way to sort of catch it in the very early roughing stage. So here I'm kind of going for, I'm not sure exactly what I was going for, but to me it looked too much like Homer Simpson with small eyes. So I was like, yeah, let's design something else. So now I'm just sort of looking at the lineup, seeing what I like from one, what I like from another, and seeing if I can come up with an idea for a third one. And this time I really wanted to play with angles and see if I can really sort of push the shapes. While I liked this, I kind of felt it took away a little bit of the tough guy look. Like he kind of looks like a garbage man to me. So I kind of decided, even though I tried some new things, I liked the feeling of the first one, but I decided I really wanted to kind of push it a little bit more because it read a little bit more to me like a comic book than a cartoon. Like the shapes weren't quite as pushed as I would have liked it to be. So I started playing around with some design ideas. And I kind of liked the big chin, like I thought that read well. But I also liked the little beady eyes in the original, so I'm kind of trying to stick to those two design elements now. And something I do, it's just a thing, I don't know why I do it, to be honest, but whenever I'm doing eyebrows, I like to darken them in, even if they're going to be blonde or something. I like just darkening them in during the rough phase because I really love eyebrows. It's a shape I love to play with. So I always make sure to darken them during my roughing phase because it just adds a lot of weight to them to me. So I was overall happy with this. And then I wanted to test this to see, does this shape read? Because he's not going to always be in this little humph phase. So I wanted to draw him in a few quick different expressions to make sure that, he still looks cool if he's like angry or laughing or is being, cunning or whatever, which is a good thing to do when you're experimenting with your characters because sometimes you can come up with a look that reads really well in one expression, but the minute you move them to a new expression, they lose a little of that magic. So it's a good idea in this very early stage when it's still plenty of time to make a change to test it. And as you say, I'm not spending a lot of time designing, really going in, super cleaning it up because this is really just for me. This is just for me to sort of see if I think the expressions read, if the face can emote, if I feel like he can act, if I feel like even when I'm really pushing the expression, he still feels like a likable lead character. When you're dealing with like, you know, sort of like a sidekicky character, you can really push the shapes and the way the characters look. But when you're dealing with your lead character, you want to make sure that they're always sort of empathetic, even if they're like this, big bad, like I'll beat up everybody I see kind of guy. You still want people to sort of like him. Now you'll notice here I sort of duplicated my original head. It's because, as I said, this is just a test phase, and I saw no point in like completely reinventing the wheel every time. So I wanted to get sort of a like cocky, like sneaky expression. And so I just decided to grab the original head I had and just work off of that because I'm not going to be taking this to completion. This was just this test to see how the face read. And here, I moved the blue line down so I can make sure that I can keep the chin in the correct alignment and stuff. So overall, I was happy with the way it looked. So I decided, okay, this is the head I'm going to move forward with. And now I start moving on to the body. Some artists don't do it this way. Some will start with the overall silhouette of the character and then design everything. I like doing the face first because it allows me to really feel the character. When I can see the face, it kind of helps me understand who I'm designing. If I just start with the body first, it feels like I could be designing sort of anybody. So really knowing the face of the character before I really start with the overall design, I find is a huge help. So now, as you can see, I'm really designing him to be huge barrel chest, very much of a V shape in his upper torso, really thick upper arms. But I'm also sort of pushing the cartoon because, as I said earlier, I don't want him to read as a comic book character. So I really push the proportions. I make his upper arm way thicker than any human can be. His like waist is way smaller than could probably support this frame. And I gave him really tiny legs because um, something about Brock Lesnar, as much as I think he's a really good wrestler, well, he's good at like 3 moves. But it's always kind of funny to me how he's this huge, bulky guy, but he has these really tiny legs. So I really wanted to kind of bring that in as, even if it's nothing else, it's like a little inside joke to me that I think is funny. And notice I'm kind of giving him sort of a generic, like in the middle of an interview, like, let me tell you something, Mean Gene, kind of, pose. Like I was gonna give him more of the flexy pose, but I'm like, yeah, I don't know. He's not really that character. He's not, Mr. Buff. He's Mr. Anti-Authority. So I thought it would be funnier instead of seeing him sort of posing in a muscly man type of pose to give him more of a like, let me tell you something about you that you don't know type phase. So I'm overall liking this. I really like pushing the proportions and the size relations of things. And I really gave him this big, bulky upper body and really tiny legs, and I think it reads really well. And then I was like, okay, I need to give him some sort of little like logo thing to put on his tights. And we've all drawn this S shape when we were in high school. So like everybody knows this S, everybody loves it. I'm just gonna kind of use that as his logo. So I just came up with a quick little SM for Smash Mouth or Stan Morton, whatever you want to refer to it. So here I just shrink it down, stick it on his tights, and there we go. We have our character roughed out. Flip him to make sure that he's not leaning or tilting. And now we start with our inking phase. So as you can see, first I convert the sketch to blue line, so it's a little bit less obtrusive and doesn't compete against the blacks. And now I'm working on actually inking the character. Now, I work in Clip Studio, and they have this sort of vector. It's not full blown vector like Adobe Illustrator has, but it does give me a lot better line, and it's an editable line, and I really love doing it. It does take a little bit of getting used to because it doesn't work exactly the same as vector and doesn't work exactly the way of raster, but it is a very handy way to have it set up. Now, because I do come from a more comic book background, I do like having a more tapered line. Um, I also do like using line weights a little bit more than a lot of cartoons do, but I also try to be very aware of the fact that it's not as easy to do that in animation. So I try to limit the line weight a little bit, but I do still love having tapers because that, a tapering line is much easier to do in animation. Now, something I know you're going to see me do all the time is I like to draw through lines. Like with the vest, you see how I drew the entire bottom part where the two vests would separate. I do that, one, to make sure things are lining up correctly, and two, because in the Clip Studio Vector, you can actually use a vector eraser, and you just kind of have to like touch the line, and it'll erase it all the way up to where another line connects. So it's like a super easy way to like get lines that do touch, but without things sort of like slightly overlapping, which does sometimes happen if I don't notice it, but usually I try to catch them as I go, and sometimes I'll even catch them in like a coloring phase. Now, as you can tell, I'm kind of fast when it comes to the inking phase. I love the inking phase. To me, doing character cleanup is like one of the funner parts of the job. It's really cool to take the sketch and make a really clean, readable line. I know a lot of artists hate the cleanup phase. Uh, it For a lot of people, it kind of loses the life of the character. When you're sketching, you can usually impart so much energy and life to it because your pencil is sort of skipping over the paper and or stylus over the tablet, depending on how you're drawing. And I know a lot of artists, when they are doing the cleanup phase, they're not skipping the pencil everywhere. They're very slow and very deliberate. And I think that that's where you start losing some of the energy. It's like you'll notice with the shoe here, like I'm trying to get this sole to line up, and I do it a ton of times before I get it, but I don't get delicate with it. I still keep the fast dancing pencil skidding across the page. Like I'm not being overly precious with it. And I think that that's one of the ways that I can really keep a lot of energy and like personality in my cleanups. So if you're finding you have trouble, whether it's inking for comics or doing character cleanup, um, try to not be as precious about it. Like draw or ink as fast as you draw. So if you draw very fast, ink fast. And don't worry if you mess up. I mean, especially if you're in the digital medium, it's very easy to fix it. So let yourself go faster. Trust me, it will bring a lot more energy to your characters. It'll get done a lot faster, and you'll be a whole lot happier with your cleanup. Now here initially I was going to make his vest completely black, but I thought, that's a little too Stone Cold. And while he is, a lot of his personality is based on Stone Cold, I don't want it to just rip off Stone Cold. I don't want it to just be, here's cartoon Steve Austin. So I really wanted to make sure that I try to bring in some different looks. Like, Stan Hansen, who, anybody who is an old school wrestling fan remembers, Stan Lariat Hansen. He had sort of a Western vest that he sometimes wore. And I really wanted to sort of bring that look in. So now we're just going into the coloring phase. Here I'm just putting the flat colors. I'm just sort of guessing at the colors I want. Like I've not really come in with a color scheme at this point. I know that Goldberg and Stone Cold always wore really dark colors, so I wanted to sort of have that look. And you'll notice I also put him in more of the like leotard type outfit instead of the just the trunks. Which again, I didn't want it to read too much like Stone Cold or Goldberg. And you'll notice here I waited for a long time before I put the hair colors in. That's because at first I was going to make it black, but then I thought, okay, that's really going to make him read as Goldberg or Stone Cold. So I thought going with a red look would help make him more of his own character. And plus, red and black always looks good together. So here I decided I wanted to give him a tattoo, or at least see if I wanted to give him a tattoo. And I kind of liked the Goldberg tribal look. So I wanted to sort of give him a tribal type design without it being like just Goldberg's tribal tattoo. And here I'm just using the symmetry tool to quickly draw that out. Like, no reference, just playing with shapes basically. And now I'm going to use the warp tool to sort of wrap it around his bicep and shoulder. Now this is a good tool if you are going to have something like this that will be showing up a lot and would be a real pain to draw over and over and keep consistent, is I'll create one unedited version and then duplicate it, and then do this and we'll bend it and size it to fit the arm. So that way I don't have to redraw it and like make sure I keep it consistent. It's just basically create it once and duplicate it and bend it to what you need. So now I'm going to do sort of a slight modeling phase where I basically just duplicate it, move the tones into a redder tone, desaturate it a little bit and darken it, and then I mask that layer, and then basically draw in the shadows in the mask layer. And once you set the layer to multiply, then you start getting shadows. It's a very quick way to build up shadows without spending a ton of time like color checking and trying to figure out, okay, what would be a good dark color for this color. This sort of automatically takes care of it for you. And with it being a cartoon, I didn't want to make the shadows too complicated because, as you're moving in space, you don't want it to be something that the animators would have a really hard time, following that form. So I kind of tried to keep the shadows very simplified. And you'll notice that the shadows are pretty dark at this point, and that's because I have the opacity at 100%. Once I get the shadows sort of molded the way I want them to look, I'll be lowering the opacity so they're not quite as strong. Like in the knee pads, you'll see that's like super dark, and on the boots are super dark. Like I don't want it to be that dark. It's almost like his shins are in night mode or something. So here I'm, checking and making sure that everything looks good. And something I like doing is giving a little bit of a red tint to the nose. It's just a little personality thing I like doing, and it gives it a little bit more life because most people's noses are red. It's the blood under the skin is a little bit closer to the surface there. Same thing with the ears and the fingers and stuff. And adding a little bit of red there sort of gives a feeling of life to them. So now the character is essentially done, and I'm just signing it with my DLX_artist signature. And I decided to sort of give the page a little bit more drama, so I throw him a little bit of a drop shadow, nothing too complex. And then if you've seen Mart, I'm sure you've seen me do this 1,000 times. It's a little shadow, like, trick thing I do. It's just a way to add some interest to the background without adding like a bunch of complicated imagery to the back. So here I save him, which don't do like I do. I'm bad to not save until I'm practically done. It's a terrible habit of mine, so don't do what I do. Save often. So there we go.